Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. You know, I've got a permanent smile on my face. But I love this time of year because every day when I get off work, I've been going home, cutting back perennials, cutting the old dead tops back, and I'm seeing little green sprouts coming from the base. Mm-hmm. The fernleaf peonies are up about 4 inches. They're one of the first things that kind of emerges. And the daylilies and things that I didn't get cut back last fall or cleaned up, I'm getting those cleaned up. And I'm seeing new growth coming, and it's fascinating to go into whether it's the perennial garden or your landscape, the shrubs and stuff. It's just fascinating to watch everything to come to life the way it's coming. And so it's just, man, I'm getting some pruning done on different things before they leaf out. So wonderful window here, and so I'm just giddy.
It is. I mean, the weather's nice enough that it's fun to spend time outside. My knees and back are still in good shape. You know, at the end of the year, they may not be, but so I can get down and do all that stuff. Let me ask you a question though. Are you already cleaning out beds and things like that? Because I know some people like to leave leaves and some stems because they are harboring some what do they call it? Some good insects.
Yeah, some good things. Yeah, exactly.
Pollinators, I should say.
You know, my mom, as I was growing up, my mom and her perennial flower beds used to like them perfectly cleaned. We would take the rake and rake out all the excess leaves and everything, and it gives a very clean look. We didn't mulch anything at the time. But, you know, things have, I think, progressed since then because I have now, years later, I've seen the value of leaving some of that material in it because it provides a natural mulch. Because in nature, you don't really see bare dirt like that.
Right.
Except, I suppose, in a desert.
Yeah.
But so anyway, what I do is I absolutely remove anything that had disease on. For example, iris leaves. Oftentimes they'll have kind of a moldy look on them, and that can transmit to the new foliage. So I like to remove the iris, the old dead stuff.
Hosta leaves can be super wet and messy.
Yep, they're always kind of soggy and messy. Peony leaves, as in the fall of the year, I removed all the peony the stems and tops and leaves because they had mildew, the gray powdery mildew, so get that source of infection off. But most everything else provides good material. For example, the giant fleece flower, you know, that we've talked about, that just 6 feet high, and the stems, and I just cleaned those up last night, the stems are almost woody, but they snap off. I don't even have to cut them. They kind of, with the twist of the wrist, they snap off at ground level. And instead of hauling those off, I'm saving myself a few steps. They're so brittle that they just break up, and I'm leaving those as kind of a mulch.
Okay.
I will, in a week or so, apply more wood mulch on top of that so it doesn't look goofy, you know. But many of those stems, there isn't the reason to just clear cut and remove a lot of that. I mean, yes, cut them down. I cut all the perennials and ornamental grasses down to about 1 inch above ground level, including the ornamental grasses. I've noticed some of the commercial areas that have the ornamental grasses. I've noticed some of those are only cutting that old straw down to maybe 6 inches.
Okay.
And that's still a lot for the green to push through.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about our native prairie grasses, you know, the stuff didn't get cut off with the pruning shears, but what did get rid of that old haystack was a prairie fire.
Yep. Or grazing.
Yep. And, you know, the bison didn't probably leave 6 inches. They'd get it down to the nub.
Yep.
And prairie fire would pretty much burn off everything. And so that's what those ornamental grasses, many of which are native types, are used to. So I like to follow that and cut them down, you know, very close, maybe 1 inch down or so, or 1 inch above soil level. So I'm having a great time cleaning all these up. And to answer your question with a long roundabout way is, instead of removing all that and instead of raking all the leaves out, if tree leaves had filtered in like they did, I leave all that. I don't. I make sure that it doesn't have a big, solid, deep cover of like tree leaves over the crown of the perennial, because then it can't kind of push through and see the light. And so I'll kind of gently comb all that aside, but leave it around the perimeter of it. I suppose there's always a danger of wind blowing it back in place. But, as rain and stuff kind of mats down the leaves, they kind of become and they kind of into a mulch type situation too. And so, I'm not as so quick to remove all that good stuff the way I used to, but definitely for sure, get it away from the crown so that perennial can see the light of day. Otherwise it gets so weak trying to push through all the excess fluff on top.
Yeah.
So I've been having a great time. How about your yard? How are you coming? Have you had a chance to get out?
Yeah, I have. And we did the same thing. I took down the giant fleece flower, the stems, and boy, they're just like reeds, aren't they? Really?
Oh, yeah, they are. They're all kind of like hollow on the inside and quite woody and fibrous. And I thought, well, this is good stuff to break down in the bed.
So, and then I'll be cutting down the hydrangeas probably in the next couple of days, just kind of clearing out some space there. And I'm sure you're getting lots of questions this time of year. And we're going to talk about one of the big questions that you've had going, which is kind of a winter burn on some evergreens. But before that, you've got another question that a reader wrote into you.
Yes, and it's always great to hear from everyone. And so Heather writes, she says, "Hi, Don. I wanted to check in with you about these extra long, thick stalks in the middle of my limelight hydrangea. Before they bud, should I cut those down to the rest of the plant or leave them? Thanks for your time, Heather." And so Heather sent a photo, and in the photo, I see that, of course, limelight is one of the panicle type of hydrangeas with the pyramidal cone-shaped flowers. And so they leaf out each spring like what I call a normal shrub. They don't come just from ground level. They leaf out from the above ground branches. But about 3 or so of the branches look like they were very precocious. They they outgrew the rest of the branches, and so they're kind of sticking out like sore thumbs. And so Heather wondered, should I trim those back? And I would round them out. In fact, really the only pruning that a panicle type like limelight hydrangea needs is to cut off the old flower heads. I see in the picture that Heather sent, those dried flower heads are still on there. I just cut ours off on ours the other day. And so remove the flower heads and then shape up the shrub. And in this case, in Heather's case, shaping it up would mean cutting back those maybe 3 big gangly that outgrew the rest of it, cut those back so it's a little more well-rounded. So that will help encourage the other branches to have a little more growth, and you won't just have quite such a tall, spindly thing. So so I encouraged her to do some pruning, and now would be the time.
Excellent. Well, let's get into the show a bit here. You said that one of the big questions, or one of the things that you've seen a lot of concern about as we've gotten out back into our yard and the snow has melted, is that you've seen a lot of examples of evergreen burn. Yes,
I'm getting lots of emails with photos attached of winter burn on evergreens. And of course, the term winter burn is kind of a generic term that during winter or when spring comes, you find your evergreens all have kind of a rusty brown burnt look to them. And so winter burn is kind of a generic term. And so anyway, I'm getting photos from kind of all around the region about that. And I don't get that volume of emails on winter burn every year, so this isn't an annual situation.
It's not like tomatoes.
It's not like blossom end rot on tomato.
The annual, yes.
Yeah, that is definitely an annual. And so, what causes this? What caused it? So how come this year I'm getting all these emails? Why was winter burn more evident and happened this year? Well, winter burn is kind of a complex interaction of a few things. It can be a dry fall, and maybe the evergreens weren't able to get enough moisture up into the foliage, the needles and everything, and they dried out over winter. It can also just be severe cold. It can be wind blowing, or it can be sunshine reflecting off of the bright snow. The sunshine, the same way that a skier gets a sunburn, that reflective sunlight can burn the needles. Or it can be lack of snow. The frost and the cold can go deeper in. And so very cold. We had cold weather this year. And so there's kind of this complex interaction. It can be any or all of those things. And it's oftentimes difficult to see, okay, well, what caused it this year? Okay, we didn't have a whole lot of snow. So anyway, my kind of estimate is, okay, we didn't have much insulating snow, so the cold went deeper in. And so I think the cold probably had a factor. Wind, we had some pretty gusty winds like we usually do, but and also many areas we're still kind of dry in the fall, so maybe evergreens weren't well hydrated. So I'm kind of thinking that those are probably the most likely things. You know, it's interesting. During winters when we have a lot of snow, and if we do get winter burn, the area below snow will oftentimes be normal and green and protected because it was protected from the, below snow line, protected from the sun. Yep. It had insulation, protected from the wind. And so oftentimes it'll be burnt on the top half and the bottom half will be fine. Well, the structure's kind of gone at that point. So it's interesting. But this year without that, so that type of situation wasn't really applicable. One thing I've noticed that's a little bit of a trend, some of these burnt evergreens are the juniper type, the kind of shrub type of junipers don't really have long needles. They have a very tiny needle kind of foliage. And some of those that I'm seeing burned were on the south side of a house that was sided with a very light color, white siding.
Okay.
So the sunlight could very well have kind of warmed up the evergreens enough, and the reflection off the bright siding warmed those up during the day on a sunny day. And then, of course, the temperature plunges at night. And the air temperature probably didn't get that warm, but yet that little microclimate could have warmed up that juniper enough. And then, of course, then the bottom falls out when the sun goes down, and there you have the burning. And so what actually causes it can be a little academic. I mean, it's kind of nice to know. But at this point, what we need to figure out is, well, are the things going to live or not? One thing I should mention too is, okay, we discussed that this doesn't happen every year. Okay, how often does this happen? It seems maybe every 10 years. Okay. I mean, you can't just set your calendar by it, but I believe the last time I wrote about this in the garden column was probably 10 years ago.
Okay.
And so periodically this just happens. Sometimes it will attack pines, which have longer needles. Sometimes it'll be spruce. This year I'm seeing a lot of it on like the junipers, the low-growing shrub-type junipers, and some on spruce trees. Also, one thing that's interesting, sometimes it will be on one side of the tree. For example, okay, these junipers that were at the base of a house with the white siding, it seemed that whole shrub was fried. Okay, I suppose it got reflection on all sides. Sometimes, if it's not by the house, sometimes it will be just one side, such as the south and west side, where the sun reflecting off the snow reflected up onto the south or west side, because the sun's kind of low on the horizon and it would hit that side. If it's a wind problem, excuse me, if it's a wind problem, oftentimes it'll be the north or northwest sides where the winter winds are worse. And so sometimes you can kind of detect a little bit about what might be the cause if you look at what sides of the plant, what sides of the evergreen might have been affected. And so this occasionally just happens. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't plant evergreens. I wish it wouldn't happen. Kind of towards the end of our discussion here, we'll talk about what we can kind of do also to try to prevent that.
I got one little question, then we'll take a quick break. You said that this year you were seeing it on junipers and maybe not so much on the pines. Arborvitaes, Are you seeing
You know,
anything
I
on
did not
arborvitae?
see it on arborvitaes. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but nobody's sent
those are
me
the
an email.
low-lying ones often. So
Yep. The low-lying or the globe shape. Some are the upright pyramidal on arborvitae. They're the ones with the softer foliage.
Mhm.
And they're certainly not immune to winter burn, but this year, so far, nobody has emailed me anything about that. Our own yard, I haven't seen any winter burn yet, so I was kind of one of the lucky ones. But on some mugo pines, the shrub-type pines, I've seen a little bit on that as well. And so it is interesting how the different types of evergreens, some years, some are affected, other years they aren't.
All right, let's take a quick little break and we'll talk about what to do now if you do have this problem of winter burn on your evergreens.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
All right, we're back. This week we're talking about, getting out in the yard now, but seeing kind of what happened over the winter. And one of the things that you've seen and that you've heard a lot about is winter burn on evergreens. So you'll notice it. If it's one of those things that if you've got it, you'll notice it. If you're not seeing it, you don't have it.
Instead of green, it's all kind of rusty brown.
But so what can people do now?
And of course, that is the question, that there's coming with the emails and the photos is, what can I do about this? And is the evergreen going to be okay? Well, after the winter burn happens, there's nothing that really can be done. Those burnt needles aren't going to revert to normal green. Those burnt needles are going to eventually fall off. There's no way to get them, coax them back to resurrect, back into green. And so the first thing to do is to check the evergreen. And by checking, I mean, look at the buds at the end of the twigs. Okay. A good live bud from which there could be new growth that would come. Live buds will be sticky to the touch. And when you kind of, try to open them up a little bit, you'll find green inside. Dead buds from which no life is going to come will be dry and they'll just kind of pop off with no life or energy there. Okay, so from the buds, then you can check the twigs. So live twigs, when you scratch away the outer brown bark on the little twigs of the evergreens, live twigs will have a green layer right under the outer brown, and that green layer is present there all year long. Even in winter when things are dormant, they still have that green layer. That's the cambium, the life layer of the tree or shrub. And if you don't see that green layer under the outer brown bark, but you just see kind of a brown layer, and if also when you bend the twigs, if they snap, they're probably dead. Dead twigs will snap easily. Live twigs are more pliable. So then you can kind of trace your way around the shrub, or if it's an evergreen tree, trace your way kind of around, look at the buds, scratch the twigs, see if there's life in the buds, if there's life in the twigs, so kind of work your way inward to see, is there any life at all in there, in the branches? Possibly there's still some life way back in the main trunk. You might find some life there. But if that's the only part that's still alive, evergreens can't regenerate branches the way deciduous can.
Okay.
If it's a deciduous shrub that was gnawed down by rabbits, prune out the damage, it'll most likely grow back just fine. Evergreens can't do that. So if the buds, any recovery of an evergreen will have to come from those outer buds or the side buds that are close to the outer perimeter. So if you've determined that all the buds on the outer perimeter are dead and you don't see any buds live that are close to the outside, you're probably going to lose it. And there's just no chance to kind of spring back. Now, if you do find live buds at the tips, growth will come from that. And it will lose all those brown needles. So in some cases, the evergreen just has good growth at the outer extremities, but everything else is bare, and it could look kind of funny. And that's what's so damaging. I always suggest to people, just wait and see.
Okay.
When growth starts in May on everything, when everything wakes up and new growth is coming, just wait and see. Don't be in a hurry to remove it. There's no magic elixir that we can give. Fertilizer isn't going to help at this point to resurrect it. And, even Miracle Grow can bring something back from the dead. And so it's kind of just wait and see what happens in May. And you'll know, and if nothing comes, well, then it's probably time to replace it. And that can be done easily in May, by the end of May. And sometimes people ask, well, would it help if I water it? And that certainly wouldn't do any harm, but it's not going to undo the damage that was already done. And, sometimes if it doesn't, if no growth comes from the tips and if it looks like the structure is totally ruined, maybe it's time to replace it. Maybe there's a newer variety that you can try. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not all just bad. Sometimes it gives us the impetus to put something new or different in, new variety, try something. So, it's interesting. Of course, the more plants you grow, you realize that losing some things is part of it. I think we've repeated this before, but the way you can tell an experienced gardener from a new gardener is experienced gardeners have killed way more things than a new gardener. And so, sometimes it's unfortunate, especially if it's an older type evergreen, but, we have to look at it as it gives us a chance to replace something. So I hope for anyone listening that did have winter burn, I hope yours will be one that just had a little minor damage and new growth will spring forth, and eventually you'll never know the difference. There are some, like some of those photos that I saw, those junipers are pretty much fried, and so I don't think they're going to make it. But
How about going forward if someone does have one that will survive? If they give it time, they see that it will survive. It seems to be bouncing back. What can they do next winter to maybe add a little insurance for those?
Yes, or maybe if you were one of the lucky ones that had no winter burn,
right?
Yeah, that had no winter burn, but it reminds us that can happen, and there aren't really any evergreens that are totally immune to that. Some are less apt to get it, but so it can be a wake-up call for us. Okay, what should we be doing? Well, one of the main things in the fall of the year is to make sure that evergreens go into winter well hydrated if we have a fall that's been dry. And now one watering before freeze-up isn't enough. Okay. Research has shown that to have an evergreen that's best hydrated, a person needs to begin even in August. If we're having some dry spells, start watering those evergreens deeply. And I mean, we're not talking daily or even weekly, but maybe every couple of weeks, make sure that the evergreens are soaked well. And so start the end of August and in September and then in October. So not just one shot before freeze up. That's not the maximum best hydration. Okay, so in the fall of the year, we can do that. And I always think it works well to have a mulch of shredded bark around an evergreen. Okay. It helps it helps so you don't have to mow so close to it if there's grass. But also, I think it just kind of helps mitigate the chance of frost or cold going quite so deep. Okay. And I just think wood mulch seems to be very friendly, and I think gives them a little bit of an edge maybe on the evergreens. And then also our good friend Martha Stewart, I've seen videos of her wrapping evergreens with burlap. Okay. And of course, Martha has people for that.
Martha has no shortage of arms and hands to do things.
She has people that in the video we're doing this with or for her. And it's interesting, too, the current way to protect evergreens with burlap, and of course, what a wrapping of burlap does is it helps keep the sun off, so the winter sun isn't burning them, and also it keeps the wind from desiccating so much. we used to feel that wrapping directly onto the evergreen, just circling it with burlap would be good. But now the current best practice is to create a little framework, pound some wooden sticks or poles in, and then wrap the burlap around those stakes so that you don't actually put that burlap directly on the foliage of the evergreen. Sometimes wrapping it like that, and then the wind is kind of whipping on the wrapping and stuff, and just the physical contact of the burlap can cause damage to the evergreen. So a better route is to, maybe it's fence posts or just something located close to the evergreen, and then you wrap the burlap around that so that it keeps the burlap just a little bit off of the foliage.
Okay.
And so, I could see a soft arborvitae, which can winter burn easily. If you put the burlap directly on that soft foliage, I could see some of that getting kind of mushed up by just the physical act of wrapping it like that.
So speaking of evergreen and foliage, is this a good time that if you have some branches that need to be trimmed, is this the best time to get out there and trim them?
May. Yep. May is good.
Okay.
Yep. May, when you can kind of see what's happening on evergreens.
Okay.
So although the leafy deciduous shrubs are better trimmed in April here, while they're mostly still dormant, evergreens, it's better to wait until they've actually started some growth. And so in May is the recommended time to do evergreen trimming. For example, I'm glad you brought that up. For example, on the pine type evergreens, which have the longer needles, such as the Mugo shrub pine, if you want to maintain a height of those so they don't get quite so tall, when the growth starts in May, the new growth is called a candle. It's kind of a finger-like projection that comes out of the tips of the pine, Mugo pine or tree-type pine, and before the needles fan out, you've got this finger-like called a candle. And to limit the growth, the height of them, such as Mugo pines, you want to kind of keep them compact and not all so huge. So you just, with the pruning shears or your fingers, just remove as much of that candle as you want, maybe half.
Okay.
And then when the needles expand and that, it kind of helps keep the Mugo pine a little more compact.
Okay.
So it doesn't grow so tall. And also spruce, the same thing. When the new growth starts at the perimeter, the edges of the branches, you can prune that. And so you can kind of mold and hold some of those evergreens. But generally May, as they've started their new growth, is the time for evergreen pruning.
Well, getting back to that winter burn that you saw on some evergreens, are you seeing or have you heard of anything with that affecting rose bushes at all?
Yes, in my own yard, the roses. Yes, and I haven't heard from anyone else. But yeah, I always say I'm a good test subject because I've done almost anything wrong that any gardener could do wrong. But what happens in my own garden is usually things that are happening in somebody else's too.
Yep.
And I like the winter hardy Canadian roses because they are the most winter hardy. But they'll suffer some dieback too. And ours did this year. Campfire Rose and Morden Blush and a few related like that developed in Canada, good and hardy. But this is a winter in which they froze back. Okay, and of course, I don't prune them in the fall. Okay, the recommended is to leave the branches all on, the canes all on until spring. So April's a good time. And so currently, I haven't pruned ours yet. I hope to this weekend. So currently, many of them are about 5 feet high.
Okay.
And I can see the winter injury because the winter injured canes are dark brown to black.
Okay.
And so I started at the tip and I'm looking down to see, how winter injured were my roses. And so I'm going black all the way down. And on many of them, only about 4 inches above ground level, I see the green. And it's a sharp demarcation between the black damaged, brown damaged canes, and then I see the green. And so I am going to, with all those, prune them down to where I see that green cane. The new growth hasn't started yet. You could wait until you see a little bit of, usually it's reddish growth coming on canes as they start to bud out. You could wait, but I like to get the old dead stuff off of there so that all the energy goes into the new and so that they don't have to push past dead canes. So my rose bushes are going to look like nubs. But that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll, once things do start growing like that, whether it's roses or once your evergreens do start growing, if there's signs that they're recovering, then fertilize. Fertilize in May, fertilize again in June to give them a little nutrition to burst forth. So I'm going to make sure that the roses, I give them a fertilizing both in early May and again in early June because they've got a lot of growth that needs doing. But I was happy to see that those roses, even though they died back from 5 foot down to about 3 inches, I'm happy to see that 3 inches of life.
Yeah.
Had they not been the winter hardy types, if they'd been a tender hybrid tea rose, they probably would have been totally frozen out.
Now, if they're 5 feet, I would imagine that they're quite wide too. Is that something that you could do where you build a little wind shelter and like you're saying with some posts and burlap? Could you
and then
do
fill that
to
with leaves? Yep.
Fill that with leaves?
Yep,
Okay.
you could use that, kind of build that frame like you suggested, then fill that with leaves or straw, and that would have worked well. The reason I don't do that is just because the Canadian roses are pretty winter hardy, and I don't mind having to cut them back. They're kind of meant to be a little labor saving, and so putting all the extra protection on is kind of opposite what they're meant to do. So, but I've been through this before on these same roses. They come back, they do fine. But the bright side of that, okay, when I prune all those down, that area needs remulching. Okay, and when they're big, 5 foot and thorny and all that, it's hard to get mulch in and around. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity since they're going to get a heavy prune back. At the same time, I'm going to remulch with shredded bark that whole area.
Okay.
And so you see, this gives me easy access. So the glass is half full, not half empty.
Getting around a rose bush, working around a rose bush can be particularly. I know that you have your welder's gloves and you're prepared, but boy, that can be painful.
One of the fanciest things my wife Mary ever gave me that I just treasure are those welder's gloves. They reach up to the elbow. They're heavy canvas, and the thorns can't prick them because I've tried pruning roses without gloves, and it doesn't go so well. So anyway, I'm sure other people probably are experiencing the same with the thing on roses, but just prune them all the way down to where you see green canes. Fertilize them, they'll grow back. But again, that's like I mentioned, that I'm grateful for that green. Yep, had they not been the winter hardy type, I'd probably be having to replace them all.
All right. Well, if people have questions for you either about winter bird, on evergreens or roses, or just any questions in general about their yard or garden, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way is to send me an email, donald.kinsler, spelled Kinzler. It's easy to put an S in instead of that Z, I found. So donald.kinsler@ndsu.edu. And thanks for all the letters and everything that people send saying that you enjoy the podcast. And if there's any topics that you'd like to see us cover, just let us know. It's fun to have these discussions.
And also, if people have questions about something, it really helps if they send along a photo.
Yes. Oh, man, I love cell phones. I love emails. And, man, we can have some pretty good discussions between cell phone photos and emails and podcasts.
Another thing that we ask of listeners is, maybe take a picture of your yard now. Maybe take a picture of your yard in June. And take a picture of your yard in July. We'd love to see pictures from as many people as possible about your gardening successes or your gardening problems. Maybe if we get enough of those, we'll have a whole show about those. That would be really fun.
Awesome. That would.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
All right. Well, Don, thanks again for coming by.
And thank you, John, and thanks everyone for listening.